Salut! In this video, I'm going to be sharing 3 horror stories of expats who moved to France and landed in trouble with their business. As we are getting close to Halloween, this is my spooky stories, but they last all year long. So I'm going to be talking about the situation, the problem, and the solution. And obviously, I can't use the person's name, so I've changed the name, but the stories are 100% accurate. For those who don't know me, I'm Valerie and I help expatriates prepare, create and manage their first freelancing activity in France. Our first horror story is someone with 20,000 euros of debt for ticking the wrong box. Now, hear me out. This is a true story. The situation is pretty unusual because I'm actually going to talk to you about twin sisters, Sophia and Tatiana. I changed the name, it's for real. 2 sisters with the same activity, selling clothes online with Vinted. Vinted, if you're from a different country from the US, it's like Gumtree. It's a place where you sell mainly clothes, and it's been booming in France for second-hand clothes. So both Sophia and Tatiana created their business selling second-hand clothes on Vinted and were doing really well. So the situation is that about a year and a half ago, I helped Sophia create her micro-entrepreneur business to sell clothes on Vinted. So I registered for her a micro-entrepreneur for buying and reselling second-hand clothes on Vinted. And she was doing really well. She had a very good year. A year and a half later, Sophia came back to me to talk about her sister, Tatiana, who had registered a similar business doing the same thing, but hardly any paper came through, and she received a bill for 20,000 euros. So she had 20,000 euros of debt. So we planned a call and asked Sophia to share with me the business papers from her sister Tatiana, so her initial business registration paper with INPI and the letters received from URSSAF. So that was the situation. So what was the problem? Well, actually, when Tatiana registered her own business, she ticked the wrong box. Rather than register a sole trader with the subcategory being a micro-entrepreneur, she registered the sole trader but didn't tick the right box. And then later on in the form, she chose micro-BIC, micro-BIC, which stands for buy and resell. And you could think micro-entrepreneur, micro-BIC sounds the same, but it isn't. Micro is a regime as the way you pay taxes, but micro-entrepreneur and micro-BIC are 2 different things. If I explain things in a simple way, micro-entrepreneur, you're going to be paying your taxes on your sales. It's pay-as-you-earn system. 12.3% of your sales goes towards your social charges, while micro-BIC, you declare and pay 1 year later. And URSSAF is going to apply a standard rebate based on your activity, and basically it's minus 71% on your sales, and then 46% of that you'll pay in social charges. Bit complex, and you might think, ooh, that's a bit much, but that's the kind of thing I would explain in the Power Hour. So if I go back to Sophia and Tatiana, Sophia had a pay-as-you-earn system where every month or quarter she would log onto her website, say how much she cashed in, and always pay 12.3% in social charges. While for Tatiana, well, actually the regime she chose is that we have to wait for 4 years for URSSAF to send you a 1-page declaration at home. You enter your turnover, and then they calculate your taxes. In the meantime, they ask you to start paying a lump sum. Tatiana didn't quite get it, so she ignored the 1-year form she had to return, and basically URSSAF thought, okay, she forgot to declare, so first of all, we're moving her on the higher bracket, just assuming she's doing well, and also she got a penalty fee on top of the social charges she had to pay. So bam, 20,000 euros of social charges. So what was the solution? Well, luckily enough, when Sophia called me, it was towards the end of the year, so the priority number 1 for us was to ask URSSAF to switch regime on the 1st of January the following year. You can always do that. If you're a sole trader, you can change regime, the way you pay taxes from 1 year to the other. So our priority was to say to URSSAF, okay, 1st of January next year, we're switching from micro-BIC to micro-entrepreneur. So that was done, no problem, but we still had 20,000 euros of taxes to clear. The second step was to file the 1-pager document that she forgot. We did that, we turned it to URSSAF. And the last step was to start to pay a little sum and then ask them to correct and schedule the payment. What is very important is when you get it wrong, you don't agree with the tax, you have to start paying a little bit, otherwise they're kind of increasing the threat and the penalty fees. So you say, okay, I understand, I'm going to start paying a lump sum of what I can afford, and let's discuss. That's what we did. We had a call with URSSAF. She paid a little bit, and then once they understood that she just forgot the main declaration, they took it into account, they recalculated their actual taxes, that bill pretty much disappeared. She had a normal tax bill to pay, so kind of saved her 20,000 euros, which was one of the best I've done so far. All this to say, don't tick random boxes when you register your business. I understand you might want to save 300 to 400 euros to register your own business, but compared to the cost of your move to France, taking this risk of taking the wrong box, which has an impact on the social charges that you're paying, on your income tax, or on your liability for your house, is risky. So don't tick something if you don't understand it. Hire some help from somebody external to help you. My second horror story is a 16,000 euro bill for a French incorporated business called Earl. This story is about Emily, who was a marketing consultant. She moved from the US, and in the US, she used to have an LLC, a US incorporated business. So when she moved to France, she thought it was easier for her to go for the same kind of business. She went for an Earl, and she started trading. Emily registered her Earl business with an accountant, and then she came to me about a year or so after saying, Valerie, I don't understand it. I haven't paid myself, and I have a 16,000 euro bill. What's wrong? And when I started digging, she said to me, well, I didn't pay myself, I only took dividends, therefore I shouldn't have any tax bills. And what she didn't understand is the type of business she went for, the Earl, there's no dividends. And one mistake that she did is assuming that with Earl, so Earl and Saul are the same thing, Earl is one associate, Saul is at least two associates, she thought she could take dividends. To me, I would say Earl and Saul, pretty much no dividend whatsoever, because the law was changed under President Hollande, and what he said, he capped the part of dividends to only 10% of your working capital. And in the case of Emily, her working capital was only 1,000 euros, so basically she could only pay herself about 100 euros of dividends, otherwise the rest would be paid as a normal income under Saul and SAS. I'm afraid to say that with an Earl or Saul, the social charges is 46% of your profit. So this type of business works very well for the activities where we have high expenses, a restaurant, builder, where you have teams, you have staff, you have vans, you have to invest into equipment. For those, we're going to keep investing and therefore reduce the profit. So that was the mistake. She wasn't explained clearly by her accountant how the taxes work and how she had to pay herself. Basically, Earl Saul, you taxed on profit, and this type of business works well for businesses where you have high expenses, not where you are a consultant with very little expenses and high margin. So it's more like a traditional activity, like a restaurant or cafe, where you have to rent a place, you have staff, you have expenses. You can keep reinvesting and therefore reduce the profit and don't pay so much taxes. But in our case, consultant, little expenses, high margin, huge tax bills. So the lesson we have to take from this is, don't assume that the French business is going to work the same way as it did in your home country, in the US, in the UK, Australia. Although it's a French incorporated business, we have two very different types of incorporated business. The Earl and Saul, where it's very much tax on profit, and what she was actually looking for was the SAS SASU, SASU one associate, SAS at least two associates, where like the US LLC, like the UK Limited, you can have a mix of a salary and dividends. So when you look into the French incorporated business, make sure you understand how the social charges are going to be working. Are you paying taxes on your profit, on your salary? Is that payroll? How much do I need to save? So the rule is, whichever type of business you go for, ask your accountant to explain your social charges so that you know how much to save every month to pay that amount later on. If you don't understand that accountant, go and see another one. It's quite common to actually have power hour calls where I just explain what the accountant said because he or she wasn't very clear, and I just re-explain how taxes work so that people know how much to save. And in Emily's case, when we looked at her business, the alternative was to move down to a micro-entrepreneur or go for a SAS SASU. And actually looking at her turnover, she wasn't far off the 77,000 euro of the micro-entrepreneur, so it would have been easier for her to manage and easier for her to control her taxes. If her turnover was much higher, 120, 130,000 euros, SAS SASU could work well. But in any case, if you move to a SAS SASU, ask your accountant how much tax you're going to be paying on his salary, because it's a French salary, no relation at all to what you had at home. So always make sure you understand how the French structure works and what you are taxed on. And my third horror story was a 30,000 euro bill for a Saul. So this one is the story of a British couple, Jessica and Ben. They bought a property in France, and the idea was to restore the property, to turn it into a recording studio where bands could come and stay on the property and record their album. And Jessica was a consultant in the art sector. She got a visa talent, which then enabled Ben to actually start his own business if he wanted to. to start any kind of business. So they bought a property, they came with a visa talent. First year, Jessica spent a lot of time working with bands as a consultant, and they restored the property, but they didn't have any booking because it took a lot of work and they made it beautiful, the best place to go and record. However, the problem was that they regrouped these two activities under the one business, so a mixture of consultancy and recording studios. But because Jessica was super busy with her consultancy work and the gîte was pretty much empty, at the end of the year, we had an activity with a high margin. As a consultant, she was charging a good amount and she had very little expenses, while the recording studio wasn't actually working. So yes, they could depreciate some of the renovation work, but they didn't have the normal cost of maybe having a caterer, hiring some equipment and so on. So the first year, they got a huge bill of 30,000 euros because Jessica did very well and they couldn't counterbalance it with the recording studio. Again, the issue was the accountant not explaining how the taxes were going to work, and therefore this couple didn't save enough to pay the taxes. So maybe on paper, the project of mixing the two worked well long term, but short term it was an issue because there was an unbalance into these two activities. And the problem was that because they have to pay this 30,000 euro bill, it also means that they can't take that money out of the business, so they're kind of struggling, working harder to pay the tax bill. And the second issue is that they have business visa to renew next year, so Jessica will have to renew a visa, and it means that by then, which is in June next year, I think, she has to do as much as she can to clear that tax bill, because with the prefecture, if you've got outstanding taxes with URSSAF of impôt, it looks really bad. And on paper, it won't look that great either. So what we tend to do when we renew a business visa, we ask for attestation fiscale URSSAF, which is a letter stating that you are all clear, you've declared your taxes with URSSAF, you paid your taxes. We can't get this in this situation. So what is the solution? That's a tricky one. We talked about short-term and long-term. Short-term, Jessica is getting in touch with URSSAF and asking to actually spread those payments. Earlier, échéancier. So you say, okay, I'm going to start paying a lump sum, but I can't pay 30,000 euro in one go. So this is what I'm offering to pay so much per month over so many months. Usually it goes in front of a commission and URSSAF tends to say yes. So that's a way to spread it, but they're going to try to clear it as much as possible before they renew the visa. That's a huge amount of money to reimburse in a short lapse of time. The second thing they can do for the visa is actually, when they get to renew the visa, show how well the activity is doing, the contract they've signed both for the consultancy work, for the recording studio, to show that although this year is a bit tricky, there's a lot of things coming in, and also to show that they're kind of self-sufficient. They paid for that property, so they've got no rent, so their personal cost is very low. So that's what I would play on to actually make the numbers look better. Short term, the question is, what I actually recommended was to split the two activities. To me, there's no sense to keep it together because Jessica is always going to be taxed on a high level because she has little expenses. So I would keep Ben on the salon and just leave Jessica as an associate, but not as a manager. So just leave Ben as gérant, and Jessica is just an associate, so she doesn't pay taxes on her work. And keep the gîte recording studio like this, because the aim with this is going to be able to claim back the expenses and depreciate the equipment. And then for this Jessica to take off that first activity of the salon and re-register it under her own name, either as a micro-entrepreneur or as a SASU. It's too early to say at this stage because she did very well. So we could say, okay, let's go for a SASU and have a mix of a small salary and wait for dividends, or to go for a micro-entrepreneur. And for now, it's too early to say because her aim longer term is to balance the activity and spend more time at home with the recording studio and lower down the consultancy work. So short term, she's quite likely to have to go externally to bring some more money, but that's not her aim long term. So it's a question to consider when she looks at micro-entrepreneur and the SASU. Okay, so what are the lessons that we can take from this video? I know it was scary, but let me put this back into perspective. Every year I take about 300 power-hour calls, and out of this is just about 3 horror stories I get per year. So just 1% of the people I talk to land in trouble, so not that many. The lessons I would take from this video is that, first of all, don't tick random boxes on forms or registration papers. These have a huge impact on the social charges that you're going to be paying, on your income tax, and on your liability. The second thing is that you want to know which kind of declarations you're going to have to do. Are you going to do a monthly, quarterly, or yearly declaration? And if so, which kind of declaration is it? Is that a turnover? Is that a proper loss and profit account? You want to know what you expect it to do so that you have the right paperwork. And finally, ask your accountant to explain taxes. If you've chosen a business type, you want to understand how the social charges are going to work. Are they going to be based on your turnover, i.e. sales cashed in, on your profit, and how much tax roughly will you pay so that you can know whatever comes in, you have roughly to save about so much. That's why I find it very useful to do a yearly projection of your sales and running expenses so you can see how much you have to save. And understand how you're going to pay yourself. Are you just going to do a bank transfer? Is it going to be a pay slip? Is it going to be dividends? And how do they happen and when? Because you can't just take them randomly. If you watch my videos, you know that my approach for this is to keep it simple. The KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. Nobody's stupid, but we just want to keep it super simple for us to manage. Start with a simple business to manage that you understand. And as your business grows, as you start to understand how the French system is working, the social charges, the income tax, then move up to a different business type that is a bit more complex, but by then you'll feel more confident and you'll be ready to understand the next rules and how to apply them to your business. If you want to understand how the social charges are working for the different type of businesses, I recommend that you watch this next video explaining the micro-entrepreneur, sole trader, Earl, Sol, SASU, the French incorporated business, and how the taxes are working. And if you want to talk through your situation as to how it will apply to you, you can book a Power Hour call with me. I will add a link to my calendar below this video. Voilà, merci, à bientôt.